This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there are 7 Louisianians trying to achieve especially high office this month. 6 are running for governor, and 1 is running for Speaker of the U.S. House. We will examine the politics and who's ahead, as well as past efforts by Louisianians to achieve higher status in Congress. We'll also look at the latest to curtail saltwater intrusion in the river. Plus, we will discuss the delay in the controversial Blue Cross sale and hear also how some local Catholics feel about possibly having to pay for clergy abuse. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Rigel, staff writer for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, LeBron Joseph, news anchor and reporter, WGNO-TV Channel 26, and Jeremy Alford, editor and publisher, LaPolitics Weekly and The Tracker. And we'll stay with Jeremy because, it's just now a week away. The election for governor and other statewide races. So what's it looking like for the governor's race? It's really hard to believe. It's only a week away for the primary.
It is, and there aren't a whole lot of surprises to speak of in this race. I think maybe the first time we spoke about this race on this show, we talked about that if the election were today, it would be a runoff between Jeff Landry and Shawn Wilson. That hasn't changed. The most surprising thing I've seen this week is folks are starting to do a daily track on this race, meaning that they're going in the field, they're surveying likely voters on their attitudes on voting and these races. And Jeff Landry's gaining. He is not dropping, he is not maintaining, he is continuing to gain. And I think folks are tuning in to this race late. There's not a whole lot of enthusiasm about it, and Jeff Landry certainly looks like the favorite. And right now, looking back, it looks like the defining moment in this governor's race is when Jeff Landry got the endorsement of the Louisiana Republican Party. And me, like others, thought, wow, now Jeff Landry gets to raise money for the party, and it's going to lift the party up because our parties are weak. The parties aren't what they used to be. Donors go through dark money groups for secrecy and super PACs for unlimited spending. They don't need the parties anymore. But what Jeff Landry actually did was he picked up a whole new campaign finance account. So he has taken over the party. He is using their finance account to raise money, and the money's going into the party and is coming out and supporting Jeff Landry. And that was probably the defining moment. I don't see a whole lot shaking up this race for governor.
I think the other defining moment was when Shawn Wilson got into the race, because he's the lone Democrat, okay? And so he kind of froze that part of the plurality of the vote is going to be his. And it's enough of a plurality to get into a runoff, but not enough to win the election. But it's really prevented the other Republicans who could have been in a position to get into the runoff and to have won, and it's going to shut them out. And so it's been that from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a race like that and you have one lone marketable Democrat, it's just going to shake out that way, especially when you have an open primary or jungle primary in Louisiana.
Now, it worked differently for John Bel Edwards 8 years ago, but that was because of the fluke of the Bob Livingston thing and all that. Yeah. But ultimately, if this is a pattern that we see with one Democrat and then a field of Republicans, we're going to always see the same thing. There's going to be a runoff.
Well, in Louisiana, we have a way of sending those like opposite ends of the spectrum to the runoff, whether it be a David Duke and an Edwin Edwards, a Mike Foster and a Cleo Fields, John Bel Edwards, David Vitter, Kathleen Blanco, John Bel Edwards, Jeff Landry, Shawn Wilson.
So Jeff Landry obviously is still polling way at the top. Number 2 is Shawn Wilson. At this point, who 3 and 4, how we're looking, and do you think those numbers could shake up at all in this next week?
There's been some back and forth for that third place spot between Stephen Wagensback, who's the former president of the state chamber, a Republican, and one of the more interesting candidates in this race, Hunter Lundy. Hunter Lundy is an independent attorney from Lake Charles, made a lot of money off of litigation against Roundup and Jimmy Swaggart. And he's managed to raise money amongst trial lawyers and Pentecostals. No one else has been able to put those together. Hunter Lundy has. And he's preaching things like a Judeo-Christian form of government. But on camera, speaking to camera on TV, it's a little bit of a softer message, kind of an Atticus Finch sitting on his porch saying stuff about Republicans need to stop fighting Republicans and that he's an independent. And he has shown up in third place, and I think he could finish there.
Of course.
A very distant third place, though.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Like I said, the other thing interesting about Jeff Landry is one, he didn't do any debates, and obviously that didn't hurt him and maybe even help him. And also, still, there's a hardcore people that don't like him, right? And yet he's been able to maintain his lead all the way through.
Yeah, that Jeff Landry polls a lot like Donald Trump in that you either like him or you hate him. There's not a whole lot of in between. But say whatever you want about Jeff Landry, and everyone keeps talking about what this administration is going to look like, but it seems like there are a whole lot of people willing to give him money and their votes, and it's showing up in the polls, and it's probably going to show up on Election Day.
And on Election Day, what's turnout expected to be?
Turnout's a big story. That was my lead story in LaPoliticsweekly.com this week. I'm expecting the Secretary of State to make a downward projection on Monday in the turnout. That's something we've been watching since June. Undecided remains high in the polls. Mm-hmm. It's becoming more difficult for pollsters to get people to answer phones, to actually complete surveys, and there's just not a lot of enthusiasm at the top of the ballot. And if you want to test, you're on your own when you go home after Election Day, how a lack of enthusiasm impacts the whole ballot. Go pull up the election results and look at the total number of votes for governor, look at the total number of votes for lieutenant governor, all the way down to constitutional amendments, and you'll find that the votes drop off the further down the ballot you get. Like, people actually go vote for governor and go home. I don't get it, but that will impact the entire ballot.
And so undecided, really. You don't think they're going to turn out? They're just not going to show up?
Pollsters who are doing this on a daily basis right now are less than optimistic about a huge turnout. And we will find out Monday exactly what the Secretary of State says. Because
we haven't had early voting, and that's where we'll see what the turnout was there.
We've had early voting and some absentee. And overall, taken all together, it looks like we're going to be behind where we were 4 years ago for governor.
On the rest of the campaigns, the statewide campaigns, is there a rising star there that you see?
There's some really interesting elections going on. The most surprising to me right now is Secretary of State. And it's got a very large field of candidates. All the Republicans are within the margin of error of each other. But the most interesting thing to me is that you have two Democrats, one from Baton Rouge, one from New Orleans, two areas that have a lot of Democratic votes. Gwen Collins Greenup in Baton Rouge, Arthur Morrell, the former clerk and senator here in New Orleans. Both are going to run respectably. And y'all, for 2 weeks, I have yet to see a poll where these two are not splitting 30% of the vote down the middle. And this is the only race where we could potentially see an all-Democrat runoff. And, I've been doing this for 2+ decades, and inside my mind, I'm like, calm down, don't go out on that limb. But it's really the only race that could potentially produce an all-Democrat runoff. And we have not seen this in a long time in the polls. Then you have the Attorney General's race. We have a potential there for an all-woman runoff between Liz Muriel, the leading Republican, and Ms. Cheek, who is an attorney here, Lindsay Cheek, here in New Orleans. She's been polling very well as kind of the lone marketable Democrat. But again, in both of these races, John Stefanski in the Attorney General's race, and just a big group of people, including Nancy Landry, the former House Speaker, all within, shooting distance of each other. So we could see some surprises in these races.
All right. Primary October 14th.
That's right.
Just a week away.
Coming up.
All righty. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Okay, over to you, LeBron. And we kind of got some we hope, good news regarding this salt wedge.
Yeah, we're hoping it's really good news. The press conference yesterday with the Army Corps and some of the local officials made an adjustment for about a month back, pushing what the local impacts would be from late October in the metro area of Orleans and Jefferson to now possibly late November. A couple of different factors playing in here. Probably the biggest factor is the, what's it called?
The sill?
The sill,
yeah.
there you are. The sill in the middle of the Mississippi River. They raised the sill. They were about 65 to 70% complete, according to the Corps yesterday. And that the salinity of the water that's coming over the top of the sill currently is a lot lower than what they projected it would be. And so that sort of all filled into exactly why the change was made. I think there is hope from Mother Nature, since this is moving back a month, that we're going to get some rain in the upper valley or whatever, and that will filter down here by mid-November or late November to sort of help this situation along. But that hasn't prevented parishes and local governments from jumping into action. Most notably, Jefferson Parish started their pipeline Wednesday, and they've done about 6 miles by yesterday. I think the total was about 15 miles to get it right up to where the hump is past Kenner, to their pumps, to where they need to be, their treatment facilities. Orleans still hadn't, I don't think we bought a bolt yet in Orleans Parish, or a pipe or
Well,
whatever.
they have more time now to think about it.
But they've got more time to think about it, more time to
and
plan.
do it.
I do think that there's some incredible coordination going on with a lot of the regional leaders in terms of what needs to happen, what's going to happen. I do also think that the federal declaration, that the both the mayors and parish leaders and the governor and then the president signed, of course, has helped, because that has freed up funding to be able to do this stuff. But the good news we got doesn't mean that there will not be pipelines at some point. I think everyone's looking at this as being possibly a reoccurring event, if not every year, every couple of years, and to have something in place that we're not dealing with the scramble anymore.
Yeah,
And
so
it
we need to
still
be
could
prepared.
happen in November.
Yes.
Yeah, this is not a given that they
Yes.
told us about the other day.
No, and
Yes.
so we still don't know what the Surgeon Water Board is actually doing with that RFP, if they awarded one of those bids.
I
or
don't
they're-
think the bid has been awarded just yet. Everything is in the planning stage at this point in Orleans Parish. They're
in
confident that it could happen and that it could be built and that will be fine.
But it's possible that in Orleans and Jefferson that the salinity levels will not be the dangerous levels, if it even comes there at all.
Right, but what they are warning against and where the problem will be, they're all pretty much conceding, is on the West Bank. And in both Orleans and Jefferson West Bank, the plan is more to barge in fresh water to assist these treatment
Because
plants.
Gretna has its own, they were
That
planning
is
on
correct.
doing that anyway.
They're saying in 1988 there was a saltwater intrusion. Now nobody who was around then, including myself, remembers that. But apparently-
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we drank salt water.
Yeah.
We-
Because I
we-
was young
we
and
kind of made
stupid
it,
back then.
But apparently it happened, okay?
Yeah.
But what they're saying is that things like the Corps of Engineers were aware of that, and they realized we need to learn more about this.
Yes.
So 1980, and they also started budgeting these issues, and so 1988 really helped this year, at least alerting everybody.
At least alerting everybody of what the dangers could be. And I also think that there's still a ton of questions in terms of how this affects appliances, what it does to pipes. I watched the coverage from all of our stations, and I think every story I've seen says something different. We've talked to appliance folks who, oh, you should be fine if it's stainless, and then other people will say, no, it's going to wreck everything.
And this has really been hard for businesses.
Yes.
Small businesses were panicking, and they're not getting clear messaging from state
saying
officials
hotels.
or
That's
correct.
locals. Hotels,
So you had a
right?
piece on the hotels also, how they were preparing for it. Well, right now we're kind of breathing a sigh of relief.
We are.
Maybe.
The panic buying of the water and stuff appears to have subsided, and there's water pretty much everywhere in terms of but that's the easy stuff, drinking water and all that.
All right, LeBron,
all
thanks
the
a
rest
lot.
that's
All
a little
right,
bit of
let's
a
go on over to you, Miss Stephanie, and you wanted to talk about that Blue Cross sale, which you always kind of, were signaling there might be some questions about
Right,
this.
so this was the huge proposed sale of Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana to Elevance Health, one of the largest national insurers in the country, $2.5 billion deal that was announced early this year, and nobody much paid attention until the regulatory hearings started coming up this fall, and all of a sudden there were a bunch of headwinds. And the deal is not dead, but Blue Cross officially took it off the table until late this year, which means after the election, and probably not until next year once we have a new governor and a new insurance commissioner in Tim Temple. And, I probably talked about last month on this show some of the headwinds that they were encountering from policyholders who were concerned about the formula that they had devised for the payout, where all this money was going to go, and also the fact that this giant social welfare foundation was going to be created with the bulk of the proceeds and also with some Blue Cross surplus money So you were talking like about a $3.2 billion foundation that was going to effectively be controlled by a small group of Blue Cross board members. And that raised a lot of red flags about, sort of who's really looking out for the best interest of the state. And it sounds good on paper, but who's going to really be looking at how all this money is spent to solve health equity problems in Louisiana? So because of that and some legislative hearings and threats of lawsuits and just a lot of pushback and unease, they postponed the deal initially, and then they postponed it again until, like I said, later this year. The interesting thing is, despite the publicity and the questions raised, the real reason I think that this deal isn't happening now is because of Jeff Landry, who happens to be the far and away frontrunner in the governor's race, but is also the attorney general. And he had weighed in August against this deal, suggesting that he had real questions. He had officially launched an investigation into it over consumer protection issues, which as Attorney General he has jurisdiction over. And about 3 weeks ago, he met with Blue Cross officials and told them basically that if they went forward, he would probably sue to block it. And so that is really, I think, what tipped the scales and put this thing on hold for now. That doesn't mean that he won't bless the deal if and when he's in office, or once he's out of office, perhaps it won't matter. But I think with that much money at stake and with 1.9 million people in Louisiana that have some sort of Blue Cross insurance in their wallet, the next governor and the next insurance commissioner want to be in charge of this. And so that's really what I think was behind all this.
Well, you better believe that the best place for a Louisiana politician on a multi-billion-dollar bill is right in the middle of it.
There you go, right.
So it's postponed for right now, but it's not a definite.
I think
not
the
over.
only thing, so at this point, let's say we get through the elections, Blue Cross maybe addresses some of the concerns, and then they refile the paperwork that they'll have to file to get it done with the Department of Insurance, and the process sort of picks up again where it left off before.
And it's going to be sold too, if it's sold.
To this company, Elevance.
And so how is Elevance responding to this delay?
Elevance is...
They're still in it?
Elevance is still in it for now, and Elevance is not talking publicly about it. They're referring all comment to Blue Cross. We're working with Blue Cross on this, I think one thing that might kill it is if Louisiana politicians muck it up enough, or if there are enough headwinds that start to raise questions on the financial markets, because Elevance is a publicly traded company, then perhaps they could walk away. That would be a possibility. Blue Cross probably won't, because there's a $75 million fine that they would have to pay if they just decide to blow it all off.
Okay, so a big deal we still have to wait about.
We'll get to do this all again in a couple of months.
All right, thanks a lot, Stephanie. Okay, Jeremy, over to you too. Steve Scalise now, his name's up for Speaker of the U.S. House.
Yeah, it seems to have come down between him and Jim Jordan, a well-known congressman from Ohio. And there are a couple of important questions here for Louisiana. One is a personalities issue that's really started to come to light in the past 24 hours, and that's that Baton Rouge Congressman Garrett Graves was the right hand of Speaker McCarthy, former Speaker McCarthy, who has been removed. And so he came into power, very real Washington, D.C. power, very quickly, and seems like it has escaped his grasp just as quickly. And he has taken a very certain tone in relation to his remarks about Steve Scalise, who is from, of course, Jefferson Parish. And he's saying that all of these ideas about everyone moving up one bump in the leadership, meaning Steve Scalise from Majority Leader to Speaker, is, quote, BS. He didn't say BS, he said the curse word. And then a lot of people heard it. And so, what's that all about? Is he going to come around? Julia Letlow, a congressman from Northeast Louisiana, has already endorsed Steve Scalise for Speaker. I imagine everyone else will too. We'll have to wait and see. The other big question of not who's going to win this Speaker and whether Steve Scalise is behind the eight ball because of a number of issues, but what could this mean for Louisiana's entire House delegation? There's a lot at stake. We have Julia Letlow, a member of Appropriations. Mike Johnson, the congressman from Northwest Louisiana, has a leadership spot in the House GOP. Garrett Graves has a important role on a transportation subcommittee. All of these things are assigned by the speaker, and a new speaker's race means all kind of new stuff being promised. And so, you would hope for Louisiana's delegation that none of that ends up in the mix, but it always could.
When do you think this whole issue of the next speaker will be solved?
We are looking at a possible internal vote of the House GOP on Wednesday, and that would be just to figure out if they can get behind a single candidate. They've been through this before. It usually takes more than one meeting, but I think they would like to try to take care of that behind closed doors and present a unified GOP on the House floor, but that's easier in the House than it is in the Senate, where there's fewer members.
Well, significant though, this is Donald Trump's endorsement of Jordan, and just like looking at the talking heads on TV and all that, you kind of sense the shift. Like early in the week, they're kind of talking the way like Scalise has it. They weren't saying that today, okay? Yeah. But they were saying that there's that senator in the Republican Party that's very loyal to Trump, and he might keep it united. So the politics seems to have shifted since midnight last night.
Yeah, I'm personally trying not to buy into that too much, because if you remember the last vote for speaker, we went on for a little while, and the dynamics started to shift here and there, and so we're just going to have to wait and see.
And Garrett Graves is saying he thinks it's going to take a while. It's not going to be
He's
resolved.
Saying that it's not going to be resolved
really
quickly.
All right, E, you wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the speaker.
Well, it's interesting that twice before Louisiana has come this close to having the Speaker of the House. The first time was with Hale Boggs, who was the majority leader in the House, and he was all set. I mean, he was on the way. And then he took that trip to Alaska with Congressman Nick Bekich, and of course that was that tragic plane disappearance. They've still never found it.
Right.
Okay? And so, I mean, he was really a powerful member of Congress, and so we just lost him, so we lost a seat. Out of that came Lindy Boggs, though, who was a very effective member of Congress. But the other real tragedy was Bob Livingston. Now, in his case, the Republican delegation had already met and they'd voted on. I mean, he was essentially speaker designate. All they had was the formality of meeting with the Democrats for the vote, but he was going to win. This is the same time as Bill Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky situation, and Livingston said that Clinton should resign. Anyway, it's caused a big furor. Well, Hustler magazine, Larry Flint, came out with a story that Bob Livingston had been having an affair. And that became such a furor, and that, Livingston, how can I govern with this? So he not only did he not run, he resigned from Congress. And so he went from being speaker designate to someone who resigned. So he was the biggest loser of the Monica Lewinsky affair. I mean, Bill Clinton escaped and did okay. But also through the years, and so we've yet to have our Speaker of the House, but also through the years, there was a time when, when you had the solid South and everybody was a Democrat, and the Democrats probably ruled, and they had seniority system. And so we had a lot of powerful congressmen. F. Ed Hebert from New Orleans, he was the head of the Armed Services Committee, and Russell Long was head of the Finance Committee. And so we had a lot of powerful people, not at the very top, but we've had people. But that whole system has changed too, and we've lost all that.
So, okay, so we'll have to wait and see how this goes. But Steve Scalise is certainly up there, and he is being considered by many as a good possibility
Contender.
for Speaker of the House. Yeah, he's definitely in there. All right, Stephanie, let's go over to you real quick now, because you had done a piece of talking to members of the Catholic faith about the letter that the Archbishop had sent out a few weeks ago regarding parishes perhaps having to help pay for the clergy abuse.
And it was something that a lot of people had suspected all along might be happening, but it was the fact that the diocese owned up and said this whole abuse scandal is going to cost us a whole lot more than we thought, and we're going to be tapping our apostolates and our parishes to help pay for it, primarily through the sale of real estate, not necessarily like taking money out of school tuition, as we talked about, I think, last time. But so we talked to a lot of Catholics in a city of 500,000 Catholics just about how they are feeling about this and processing it and seeking out the people that are still going to church and worshiping. We could find 1 million Catholics who are really angry and don't go to church anymore because they're so disgusted by this, and that's certainly but of those who are, and they tend to skew older, there's so much anger and so much hurt, and yet still a lot of faith in the broader message of this church. And therefore, I think in a certain amount of resignation, maybe that they will go ahead and pay. Or, as I talked to a lot of people who said, they still give money like to their parish building fund or to the charitable causes, like dedicated money, but they don't give money for general operations or money to the archdiocese. People seem to draw a distinction between the faith in Jesus and the archdiocese, between the local church and the priests that they know and the archdiocese, you know, and that's sort of, I think, how people process it in their head. There are some younger Catholics who are very devout who maybe haven't lived through 20 years of this in the same way that older people have, and some of them are like, look, let's just pay off, time to move on, you know, because I think they haven't experienced it. And then, of course, there's tremendous hatred and sadness and disgust and everything else with those whose lives have been personally touched by the crisis. It's a mess. It's really
it
sad.
really is. So
It's
there are
sad.
those who
the
are
biggest word.
just really offended, saying, I'm not going to do that, and others say, I'm keeping the faith. Basically,
Yeah, I mean,
that's
it's
where
a
it comes down to.
range, and it's sort of like, it's not black and white, it's a whole lot of gray and shades in between.
All right, Steph, thanks. Time for other stories. E.
Yeah, the city of Shreveport is commemorating the 150th anniversary of what is remembered as the third biggest yellow fever epidemic in the nation's history. It started in 1873, in August of 1873. It ended in November. 1,200 people died, 1/4 of the city's population. 80 people were just buried in a mass grave. And so in these days, they're commemorating it, just they have monuments and memorials. And it ended in November. It ended abruptly when the deep freeze came over Shreveport, and it just drove all the mosquitoes away or killed them. And so it ended. But anyway, it's being remembered this year.
Steph, over to you.
We talk a lot about the big office buildings downtown and what's going to happen to them. And 1615 Poydras, otherwise known as DXC, or the Freeport-McMoran building, that's up for sale at debt amount, which means, at a big loss for the investor, buyer, owner, I mean.
All right. Over to you, LeBron.
We lost an incredible drummer this week, Russell Baptiste of the Baptiste family, cousin of John Baptiste. Passed away, pretty sad, 57 years old, had a heart attack. Acclaim and tributes come from around the world. He'll be laid to rest on Tuesday with more music tributes.
Yeah, a real renowned drummer.
Certainly.
All right. Okay, over to you.
Every election cycle gets weird, and it's usually around this time. So I'm encouraging everyone to listen to your local radio, look in your mailboxes, because you can start seeing weird mail pieces and kind of humorous commercials. You know, this is when things get weird, so pay attention.
Yeah, okay, and go to the polls next Saturday and cast your vote. And early voting ends on Saturday tomorrow, right?
Right, early voting ends tomorrow, and you can request an absentee ballot through October 10th.
Okay. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us. We will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.